Tonight, I am very excited to welcome Debra Whitman, celebrating the release of the book, The Second 50, Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. Dr. Whitman is AARP's Chief Public Policy Officer and the former staff director for the Senate's Special Committee on Aging, and was a researcher at the Social Security Admission. She also holds a doctorate in economics from Syracuse University and lives in Maryland. In her new book, Whitman presents practical steps we can take to help create better second 50s. So whether you are approaching 50 in your later years or caring for someone who is, you'll find a wealth of wisdom in the pages. Informed by Whitman's unmatched expertise and her deep passion, The Second 50 is an indispensable guide for living well in the 21st century. Whitman will be in conversation with Margaret Talev, the director of Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism and Citizenship in Washington, D.C., and Axios' senior contributor. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Debra Whitman and Margaret Talev.
Sarah, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Hi, Deb.
Hi.
You feeling good? And it's not a bad turnout because it doesn't often spill into the side section. So I feel like that's really happening.
And the most exciting thing is there's people here from each of those places that I've worked or been or friends. So I've got a nice hometown crowd.
This is your life. This is your second 50. Okay. Some quick crowd participation before we start. Who in this room is ages 50 to 60?
15 to 16.
Who is 61 to 70? Have we got any 71s and up? Oh, yeah. Yes! Have we got any 81s and up? Excellent. Can we get any higher or are we done? How about any under 50s, but looking at it? Okay, I love that too. Okay, excellent. Okay, so now we got a good range in this crowd. Let's start with the two most obvious questions. By the way, I loved this book, and I'm buying it for like all my girlfriends, and we're all gonna eat a tub of ice cream and figure out what we're doing with our lives. So let's start out with the two obvious questions. Okay, the book is called The Second 50, Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. So how do you define the concept of second 50? And what are the 7 big questions? And then you still have to buy the book, by the way, at the end, but at least now we can frame the conversation. What are the 7 big questions, and why did you call it The Second 50?
I called it The Second 50 because we do a lot of planning for the first half of our life. And in fact, when I looked at my bookshelf when I was about to turn 50, I had probably in a section over here, what to expect when you're expecting. My kids were about to go off to college. I had lots of books about that first half of life. And I realized there was a lot of questions I had about the second. And so I call it The Second 50 because we, up until the 1900s, we only lived till about age 50. And since then, we've added 3 decades of life. And we need to start talking about those. We need to start planning for them when we need to start thinking about them. So I thought, well, what are the questions I have that I want to know? And I wrote them down. And I think they're some of the basic questions. I actually had more that got cut because of my word limit.
So would it be like the 9 questions to midlife and beyond? That's the sequel.
7 has a better ring.
Okay,
anyway.
7's good.
So the questions are this: how long will I live? And I found out that it varies a lot, and that your zip code is more important than your genetic code. I looked at will I be healthy? And realized how important our relationships are and our mindset is to our health. I looked at will I lose my memory? This is the biggest fear that most people have. And I found that actually the rates are going down, and it's not as high as what most people fear. I looked at then some practical questions like how long will I work? Because people are working longer. And how will I have enough money? Because that's a huge fear of how you're going to finance these longer lives. And then how Where will I live? Where I dealt with long-term care. And the final question is the final question: how will I die? And then, because of the work I do, I have a bonus chapter, which is all of those things I talk about. We have holes in our society, and how do we fix those holes so that it's easier to age well in America?
Okay, so I want to get to, I'm not going to say the politics, but the policy of this in a couple minutes, what Congress can do, what they are doing, whether it's enough. Spoiler alert, it's not enough. But so we'll do all that. But I still want to start in the personal space because I want you to set the scene for us. Right around the time you were turning 50, a few things were happening. There was a little thing called the COVID pandemic. And your husband, Glenn, is in the audience. Can you raise your hand for us? Great. I'm glad that you're here. Yes. Something happened with Glenn on a hiking trip. So I'm hoping you can share a little bit about that and about COVID and how those two things came into your thinking about the book, whether you were already definitely going to write it before or whether those were definitive kind of parts of your kind of come to Jesus moment where you're like, I got a lot of stuff I got to think about.
So I'll try and get through the story of Glenn. That he's here tells you how it ends. But Glenn and I are from different faiths. So when we wrote our wedding vows, we promised, instead of I'll love you forever, that we'll love each other till we're 103. And that's a little funny because he's a year older. And so will be a year when he's 104 and I'm 103. And we tease each other all the time about that. But we've always had this sort of long view of our life. But at age 48, he was hiking in the Colorado mountains and felt some chest pains. And Glenn's a teacher, so he had a lot of CPR training and realized the signs that he was having a heart attack.
And you were not there.
I was not there.
Nobody was
he was
there,
hiking
were they?
by himself. We had been together on a family vacation, and he had some work to do, so he was there a few days later. So luckily, he asked for help. And thank God for Boulder Mountain Rescue, who ran up the mountain, carried him down. He got to the emergency room where his heart stopped. And a couple broken ribs from the compressions and a couple stents, and he was fine. And
I don't know. That's debatable. I mean,
that's
yeah.
the most important thing. And I got through the story. And
he looked away, though. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we couldn't. If we had locked eyes, I would have never finished that one. So, the big moral of that story is, even though I'm talking about how long will you live and all these definitive questions, as if I have an answer for everyone, it made me realize that there's a lot that goes into all of these things. And really understanding, sort of the trends, which I look at, but it's really about the individual and how their life unfolds. So you asked me about the pandemic. So that was another shift, I think, in the book when I realized this isn't a book about everyone being the same, that I really need to look at disparities across the population because we have them. So, even in life expectancy, if you look at women, we live in the United States 6 years longer. And if somebody wants to ask a question, I'll tell you about the months of research that I did to figure out why. Then if we look at income, the top 1% lives 10 to 15 years longer than the bottom.
That's an astonishing statistic.
It is. Education, 6 years longer if you have a advanced degree. There's huge differences by race and ethnicity. Native American life expectancy in this country is 65. I'll remind you the retirement age for Social Security is raising to 67. So I really wanted throughout the book to look across the population, look where things were happening that were good and bad. And again, these differences in life expectancy aren't because we are biologically different, except men and women. There are policies and things that happen in our lives that are cutting our lives short, and we should talk about them in ways to fix them so that everybody can live a better life.
I think we're going to get some of those questions in the Q&A. I hope that we will. You wrote in your book, I wanted to know what determines how long we live and why some of us live much longer and healthier lives than others. We talked about some of that now. Genes, lifestyle, where your role in society and whether government can help you. You also wondered whether we can all live to the magic age of 103, where you get a 1-year hall pass on your husband. So my question is, did you
He gets one.
Yeah. Oh, even better, Glenn. Everything's coming up roses. So my question is, did you end up writing the book that you thought that you were going to write, and how did it change? Kind of what turns did you take in the process of researching something that you already researched for your job, but now like with a real purpose and a deadline?
I think one of the most fun things that I did was talk to experts. So I thought I knew a lot, given I'd worked on these issues for 25 years, a second quarter, since we're breaking our lives into different time periods. But I realized just there was so much that I didn't know, and getting into the data, doing surveys, talking to experts. There were many things I thought were facts that turned out not to be. And so,
Like, can you think of what? Like what?
So I was going to write that everybody needs an advance directive, and we were just talking about that with a colleague whose mom has dementia, and then I looked at the data, and most advance directives aren't followed, and you may not want it to be, because you sign an advance directive when you're young and healthy, and you say things like, I don't want to be on a ventilator. And then COVID hits, and it never occurred to you that you could be on a ventilator for a short period of time and then back off. And so, these are the things that, the thing to do is really to talk to somebody, share with them what you want, because every situation is different. You make different decisions as you age, where things that you might not have thought that were acceptable become acceptable. And so it's that conversation that matters. And so talking to these experts and really being open to the fact that I was curious and wanted to learn and know, not just sort of spew off a whole set of things that I thought were right, was really exciting for me. Yeah. I loved learning. There are 1,138 footnotes. 39. I'm sorry, my Mary Genevieve, who helped format and research 1,139 footnotes.
Scarred for life.
And that we kind of loved it. But and that's the other thing, is I wanted to make sure everything was evidence-based. There's so much out there being pushed as
supplements or whatever.
Supplements or, do this, don't do that. And
you wanted everything to be true and fact-based to the best of your ability?
I did.
Yeah, it's good.
Hello in Washington.
I like that.
You can do that. And the other thing that was really important to me is that this be a book that anybody can read. And that you can pick it up and read one chapter because you're really interested in learning about, will I lose my memory? And then a few years later, you want to learn about where you're going to live because your mom is considering moving. And so it's that kind of a book that you can use as kind of a reference for later.
It can also be kind of, though, like a jumping off point for things that you dream about or want or have always wanted. I'm sort of curious, if you were recommending this book to a 25-year-old or a 75-year-old, would they read it in a different way than a 50-year-old? What would you do with this book if you were 25 and your mom was like, Merry Christmas, and you were like, would you be like, I'm going to get a jump on, I'm going to start my Roth IRA, or what do you do? I feel like it's kind of marketed, like the title is really hardcore for like 51, 52, 53. You're like, I got to buy this book. But I feel like there is a value proposition for younger and much older people too. And I'm wondering how you thought about that.
Yeah, I do not think this is a book for only 50-year-olds. And my son is here, so 22. He has not read the whole thing. But he's really excited about it, I'm sure. So the way I look at it is, if you're going to be 50 one day, there's a lot in here that's useful. You still need to know how Social Security works if you're in your 20s. If you have loved ones who are over 50, it's helpful to understand what they're going through, the choices and options that they have. And if you're over 50, like I said, maybe you're at a part in your life where you're no longer working and you skip the how long will I work because you've already checked that box. But you're very interested in the how will I die chapter or the where will I live. And so I do think it has a broad audience. I'll just say one of the best parts of writing it too was using the questions for conversations with my own family. So I use lots of examples for my family within the book because when we look at aging, we all sort of say, well, my mom did this or my dad did this or I went through this with them. So there's lots of those stories. You'll get to know Jim and Mary and Uncle Barry and all the people that I know and love. But writing the book and asking my parents questions about each of the chapters, I learned a lot about them and what mattered to them. Yeah.
Questions that would have been harder to ask if you didn't have the excuse of the book?
Absolutely. So, one thing that came clear when I was asking them, where will I live? They love their house. They live in a rural community. They've got their friends. They have a view of a lake right in front of their house. They do not want to leave that house. And having that conversation really crystallized, well, okay, they live in a rural place, so there's no Ubers or taxis. It's 100 miles to most of their doctor's appointments. So we need to think about transportation for them. And so thinking in that way of, okay, well, what are the things that matter? I'll just say one other conversation I had with my mom was about what she wanted for her funeral. And she said, oh, it's whatever you and your brother want for me. And I said, no, actually, it'd be really great to hear what you want. And then she said, oh, well, it's really important to me that I have 2 funerals.
Which you would not have guessed.
Which I might not have guessed.
What are the 2 different?
She wants one in her small town, and then she's going to be buried in my father's family plot on the other side of Washington State. And so she wants one over there for the family that live over there. And so knowing that, I can...
When was she going to tell you?
I don't think ever. I think she wanted us to know. I think she wanted us to just innately know that. But that's the problem of not having these conversations. And I do think they're important to have with your family and with yourself and your spouse and those around you, and understanding what are your priorities. If you don't know what your priorities are, it's really hard to make them happen.
Okay, that was like super deep. Just dropped the bomb there. No, but like good.
We can talk about the Kiwi Coffin Club.
Yes.
One day.
Yes. Okay. I feel like I'm like looking at the clock. Okay. So I feel like there's 3 kind of buckets of universal questions that we should touch on a little bit. I know this will come up in the Q&A. We can save some of the specifics for that. Caregiving, brain health, retirement. Are there just a couple of practical things that you learned that everybody here should know about how to think about caregiving, brain health, and how to think about not just financially to be prepared for retirement, but like if you're thinking about retiring in your early 60s and you could live to 100, like what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Like how do we change the way we think about what retirement means or the runway for that when we rethink what the span of our lives could be?
All right, 3 big questions. I'm going to start with brain health because it's people's number one fear. Half of us think that we're going to get dementia when only 15% of people in their 70s even have mild cognitive impairment. So it's more rare than we think, and the rates are actually going down. The other thing people don't realize is that you can lower your risk factor for cognitive decline and dementia. So doing simply 5 healthy habits, which also help you live a decade longer, things like eating right, exercising, not drinking, not smoking, and maintaining your body weight, you lower your risk by up to 1/3. We can lower global risk by up to 40% by also addressing things like air pollution. So it's not necessarily inevitable that you will get it. There's things that you can do to maintain your cognitive abilities. So that's, I think, a key message of the book. And the other key message is if you notice changes, talk to your doctor. Because it may be something serious, or it may be a vitamin deficiency. It may be a drug interaction. Earlier this year, my dad was taking some new medication and started to see trees growing out of the wall. We were really worried. And then he stopped taking the medication and the trees disappeared. But no, again, if we had assumed that the
Lewy bodies, it's all over. Just go to
Lewy
sleep.
bodies
Yeah,
is
right.
bad.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So again, those are some good things to think about. You asked about work. Actually, twice as many people are working or looking for work in their 50s than they were in the 1990s. So people are working longer. But a lot of people are pushed out of the jobs before they even realize. In fact, half of us were going to lose our jobs in our 50s. And only 10% of those will ever get their jobs back. So some things that we need to think about is how do we maintain our training and education? Older workers are often not offered. How do we think about caregiving so we don't have to leave the labor market? Yeah. And how do we create systems of care so that people can maintain their work, and employers offering flexibility so if you do have care, you can do both. So I'm mixing in some of your questions. I'll just say on a macro level, sort of ignoring things like the need for care in this country, we're losing billions of dollars by caregivers having to leave the labor force. So there is a cost, whether or not government programs cover it.
So I promised a political/policy question. Let's do it. It's Washington, D.C. What's the biggest thing that Congress or a White House should be doing if you could change or create one policy? Just wave a magic wand. There's no filibuster. No one's getting primaried. It's just going to happen. What would it be?
Okay, so I'm going to cheat.
Yeah, good.
Because the one thing is a whole bunch of things. So many countries have created what's called a national plan on aging. So they look at the population, they see that it's aging, and they do something about it. And that would be great if we could do that here.
Let's make it a bipartisan commission.
Let's make it a bipartisan commission. And so these are, most of the plans cover things like housing, transportation, healthcare, work and jobs, all of the things that I'm talking about in the book. They say, okay, well, we need to think comprehensively because all of these things are related. So the good news is there's actually movement towards that. Congress did pass a law as part of the Older Americans Act to create a blueprint for a national plan, which was released by the administration in May. AARP has put out our version of a national plan. Different states have passed laws for a national plan. And what we need to do is start realizing that demographic change is serious. It's happening. We see it every day, and we need to do something about it.
Okay, 1.5 questions about this. So obviously the current Medicare and Social Security are kind of already stretched anyway. If people were really living to 100 regularly, you have to completely rethink the way those are funded. The math, right? The math for it. I think everyone would argue, as long as people are healthy and want to be alive, that we should live as long as we can. But that doesn't mean that people can work 40 or 60 or 80-hour work weeks when they're 90. Is all of this going to require a higher tax? Am I touching the third rail? Am I allowed to ask this question? Is it going to require taxes to go up? How is this going to get? If we're going to truly take care of fellow humans the way we should, is it going to require more revenue?
So I'm going to call it an investment.
Oh, okay. How much? No.
Well, again, there are costs to doing nothing.
Okay.
Right. So there are costs on families who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on caregiving and long-term care, and people leaving the workforce. So yes, there's a cost to this. There are ways to raise revenue in this town, as we know. I'm not going to go into specific sources because I don't think this is a conversation about specifically the all of the pain, but also just how do we create a system that supports the populations that we have. I'm sort of looking for a more realistic conversation. And when we talk about Social Security, and I have some friends here from there, and I worked there, there's hundreds of different proposals of ways to make the program solvent. And what we need is action, because the longer we wait, the harder it is. So if I wrote a report when I was working the Senate Aging Committee, minor tweaks were all that were needed to make the program solvent. And that was, more than a decade ago, almost 2 decades ago. And those tweaks are getting harder.
Yeah.
So again, there's a cost of inaction.
Okay.
And to me, that's a tax on all of us of the uncertainty, because I don't know what my check is going to be. I don't know how much I'm going to get when I retire. It's hard for me to plan for when I retire in 2034 is the year in which Social Security can no longer pay full benefits. That's the year I turned 64.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And
Isn't that funny how that works?
And the last time it was touched, I was in middle school, right? So that's the last time the program was really addressed its finances. And so we need to have these conversations. We need to have regular ways of addressing problems.
You're saying we needed to have them anyway. We definitely need to have them if we're going to live longer.
We do.
Yeah.
And we are. And so let's get on it.
We're running low on time. I guess what I want to ask you in the end, can I do an aside? I'm going to give a shout out to my Aunt Kathy. She's really my husband's Aunt Kathy. You don't have to raise your hand unless you want to. I can see you hiding back there. But I'm going to tell you that Aunt Kathy is 77 beautiful years old. There she is. Put it up, Kathy. And Aunt Kathy told me that Aunt Kathy says her secrets to life are walking a lot every day and drinking a lot of water with lemon. But I also think that Aunt Kathy's third secret is just being relentlessly positive and upbeat about the way she sees everything as an opportunity. And what Kathy told me about this book is that she is so excited to tackle opportunities to rethink her second 50, but wishes she was not already 27 years into her second 50. So a toast to Aunt Kathy.
Can I just say something about that positive attitude?
Yeah.
Because this is really important. More important than your eating right and your exercise is actually having a positive view on aging. If you think that getting older is a time of wisdom and the ability to give back, you live 7.5 years longer. You have fewer heart attacks.
Way to go, Glenn.
Your brain volume is actually higher. And so, just changing your mindset actually makes you healthier. The other thing that can help is having a sense of purpose. And purpose can come from the work you do, whether it's paid or volunteer. So there's a lot we can do to improve our own second 50.
You might have just answered this question, and then we're going to go to your questions. But my closing question for you before we do is, how did writing the second 50 change your own outlook on your second 50, and what are you doing differently or thinking differently now? How are you putting it into action?
The last piece of things that people should do is mind their relationships. So the Harvard study of adult development looked at people who are healthy in their 80s and said, well, what's special about them back in their 50s? What's different between healthy and unhealthy people? And it was the deep relationships that they had. And I might cry because I'm looking around this room to friends and former colleagues, and I really want to invest more in my relationships because I've gotten to meet a lot of really great people, and having them here to support me is all going to help me live longer.
I love that. Thank you, Deb. Okay, so now for the smarter questions. The second half, please, if you have a question for Dr. Whitman, please line up at the mics. When you do, please make sure you're asking a question and that it's one question if possible. Tell us your name if you'd be willing to. And yes, please, ma'am, take it away.
I'm Dr. Caroline Poplin. I'm around the age of your aunt. I'm a physician. Money is very important. And have you thought, I mean, you're talking about Social Security, and the country is in a very anti-government phase, which I don't think is going to change. There was a time in the 60s and 70s when we were competing with the Soviet Union, and companies were going to provide their workers with, it was much better to be a worker in the US because your company gave you health care and provided a pension, a defined benefit pension. Full disclosure, my late husband, Marty Slate, was head of the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. And in the 90s, we switched over from defined benefit to defined contribution, which was terrible. You cannot save enough money and have it invested and have enough to retire on. And Social Security is not going to be improved, not these days. So have you thought about how to get the private sector to help finance the retirement? Because there's no other place for the money to come from.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, and thanks for the work of your husband. The PBGC, for those of you who don't know it, guarantees people's pension. So in case a company runs out of money, people still get paid. So you're right. Defined benefit pensions have gone away from your husband's time to collapsing, although I've been interested to see some of the union negotiations. We're trying to bring back some pensions. So most people who have the ability to save have it through their employer, but it's not required that employers offer you the opportunity to save. No. One of the things we've been trying to do is pass laws state by state in order to make sure that everybody has an easy way to save from their paycheck. It's not a DB pension, which doesn't pay out in the same way.
And the risk shift.
And it shifts the risk to individuals. And that's the big change from defined benefit, where you get the payment for the rest of your life, to defined contribution, where you have to make the money last yourself.
Thank you, Doc.
What about orphaned older women? I understand it's a growing cohort in society, women who, for whatever reason, do not have husbands or partners or children. And it would seem that they face a more vulnerable future in their later years. Does your book go into that phenomena and what can be done for them?
Yeah.
I'm one of those, just so you know.
So I do talk both about women's financial security and the fact also, because we live longer, even if we did have a spouse, we often are living alone. And it's hard because women have been paid less their whole life, so their Social Security checks are thousands of dollars less. We're less likely to have a pension or a 401k. And we didn't get to talk about ageism in the workplace.
Oh, yes. Let's do it now.
Which hopefully somebody will ask.
What about ageism in the workplace?
Can I co-opt your question? Because I know I'm not hitting the single women hard enough, but
Well, I was more concerned about the fact that they don't have children or someone in the next generation to provide non-financial support.
right, and care too.
Is the question who should provide that care? Or what is to be done?
Is anybody thinking about what's going to happen to these people?
Yeah, because I'll just say the current system is an assumption that somebody else is going to take care of you. And that you do have levers of support, because the only program is Medicaid that provides any kind of long-term care. To qualify for Medicaid, you basically have to spend all of your assets and have a low income. So we don't have a plan for older women who are single. And we need one. And
Thank you.
Anne Montgomery's going to ask me the same thing.
Yes, Anne Montgomery. Deb, congratulations on writing a thoughtful book. I haven't read. I can't wait to read. I want a signed copy. So you kind of preempted my question. I was going to ask about ageism, so I will. But not only in the workplace, culturally. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. And in the media, you can't get away from it, certainly in the presidential elections, and it seems to be getting worse. So how do you see it today, and what are your hopes for how we can address it and reduce it in the future?
Thank you for asking me that. And yesterday was World Ageism Awareness Day, which I'm sure you all celebrated and sent cards to each other. And if you do look at the greeting cards that are out there, they're all ageist. Like, they're horrible. They're horrible. Ageism is one of the last isms that we have not tackled. And it's unique in that it affects every single one of us, and we do it to ourselves. And I already talked a little bit about how self-ageism and thinking bad about being older really affects our health, but it also affects our society because we push people out by assuming they don't have capacity. That costs our economy $850 billion. So you want to know where money comes from? That's one place.
From not being ageist?
Let's just not be ageist, and let's let people work when they want to work. And so you're right, and it pops up all over the place. So one of the cures, back to that, how do you want to live longer and have a positive view, is every time you hear something or say something about age, take a moment and think, is this a positive thing or a negative thing that I'm saying? And just make yourself aware, because most of us are like, oh, I just forgot that because I'm so old. Or we'll say, happy birthday. Those are the types of things that we can change ourselves. And what I'm excited about is there has been, I think, more awareness and conversations about this, both in popular media and with champions who are trying to say, well, you shouldn't have all this, anti-aging serums for teenagers, which apparently is a thing, or even just use that term, right? Why can't we be pro-age? So I'm lucky I get to work at ARP with vibrant 80 and 90-year-olds. And so I get the opposite of that. Like, I can't wait to be, I couldn't wait to be actually qualified as an ARP member, even though I'd worked there for 8 years.
My card, it finally came.
It finally came. I don't know what everybody else is worried about, but.
Thank you.
Hi. So there's a couple of things I'll bring up briefly, and you can choose. One is I ride a bike. I'm going to be 80 next week, and I'm still
Happy
able
birthday.
to ride a bike.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. And I'm as amazed as anybody else, quite frankly. But I have made an effort at it. But regardless of how much I've worked at it, nevertheless, I'm changing.
Yeah.
So part of the mystery is what is the rate of change? I mean, if you look back to the early years of your life, it was exponential. And then you kind of just hang in there. And then and then you get to a point where, well, I know I'm going to die. I know I'm going to deteriorate. And I fight that because I agree with you. The internal is very important. And that was going to be the last part of my statement. But I'm asking you, do you have any idea of the median speed at which a person changes?
Like the drop-offs or?
Yeah. Where does it occur? So far, I've been lucky. But nevertheless, I sense it coming on. So that's one of the things. And the other thing is the internal thing and the isolation. Particularly when people lose their income or their jobs, so to speak, a lot of connections come that way. So my point is the need for connections. In other words, I have activities such as coming here, but other things that I connect with, and how important that is, and sometimes how difficult it can be to find something that you can plug into where you're connected. That's it.
Really good point. I think one of the things we talk about in aging is having our health span reach our lifespan. And this is actually true for a lot of centenarians. They're healthy all the way until the last few months. And so everybody's rate of change is different. There isn't a standard. And the health spans also vary across the United States. also due to policy changes. So people get diseases in West Virginia 20 years earlier than they get them in Minnesota. So the rate of change varies a lot by individual and even across
What's
the
the
country.
average, though? I mean, where do you expect a lot of change?
It's not good because we're adding more years. So life expectancy has increased 2 years, and only 4 months of those has been healthy in the last few decades. So and we can be doing better. And again, some of this is environmental, some of it is personal decisions, some of it is our healthcare system. All of those can come together to extend your health. But what you're doing of exercising and staying connected, so being isolated is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So my dad, I told you about those healthy habits. Well, he has a Jim Beam every night. He doesn't eat healthy, but we're from a small town, and he goes to the post office and he'll spend an hour not picking up the mail, but talking to each and every person that comes in from our little town. And you know what? That's probably the healthiest thing that he could be doing.
Probably is the healthiest thing he is doing also.
It's probably the healthiest thing he is doing, although he does like his Jim Beam.
Thank you.
Happy birthday again.
About the real old people on the street. That's getting very disturbing now.
Homeless people who are elderly? Yeah.
Hi, it's wonderful. So I'm a retirement life coach, and I'm really
wait,
curious.
Really?
Yeah,
Did you bring your cards? Okay.
That's gauche, I would say. But one of the things I'm really curious about, because you mentioned it right at the beginning, and when I work with clients, I've actually learned a lot about being humble in this whole area of planning. So when I started, I was like, okay, let's develop a plan, have a 5-year plan. And now what I say to clients is, a plan is something to be broken. It's something to have something. So I'm really curious, after doing this book, what is your thinking about how people can execute and make a plan? It's not an easy thing, and I'm learning myself. So I'd love to hear your thinking about this idea of how you plan, because you said in the beginning, remember how we spent all our time planning up to age 50?
Yeah, that's a good question. You probably have more experience at the individual level. I'll just say in our lives, I was planning for 103 and then almost got whacked in the face. Yeah. And I think the lesson that I took away from that is, yes, you should plan for a long life. We are living longer. Particularly your clients probably have some money, so they're at the top or upper end of those averages that I was talking about. But you do also have to sort of take every day as a meaningful day. Yeah. And I think that's what Glenn's heart attack taught me, is that, why I want to plan for my future in all of these different areas. Life is uncertain. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other, yes?
This is why I'm alive. I'm pushy. But this issue of the street people and the aging, it's getting very, very dramatic. So, and that is policy. That's what are we going to do as a community? Because there's going to be more and more.
Yeah, it is something that I worry about, and we do need more investments because many older people live solely on Social Security, which in most jurisdictions, the entire check wouldn't cover the rent. And you don't get the full check because you take out your Medicare premiums and then you have to pay for health care. And my friend Tricia over there estimated that by 2030, half of your Social Security check is going to be going to your health care costs.
Jesus.
So it is a growing crisis with people not able to afford adequate housing as they age, and we're not building enough Section 202, which is a particular part of HUD's funding to create housing for older people.
Are there any other last questions? Yes, we have one.
So I have a 17-year-old nephew, and he's always like, "Oh, Uncle Joe, Uncle Joe, Uncle Joe, you're getting old." And I have a twin brother, so his father's the same age. So, but what would you tell a 17-year-old or even a 20-year-old today how to plan for the future? Now, granted, at 20, that's the last thing in the world that I was really thinking about. Yes, our authority, you got to buy a house, you got to buy a house. I remember my father saying it. What would you tell somebody today with all the wisdom and the experience that you have?
As I look at my, thanks, Joe, as I look at my 20-year-old son, I guess I want to talk to them about what's important to them rather than just tell them what to do. Because it may be that saving for the future is the most important thing because they want to be secure, but it may be that they want to invest in their education or in creative pursuits or others. And so I tend not to like one size fits all advice for anything. And I didn't offer that in the book, like everybody has to do these 3 things, other than think positively about aging. So maybe that's my only thing.
So then I will turn the question around on you.
Yeah.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
My 20-year-old self, keep learning. Honestly, I guess if that's one thing I want to do in my life, and that's one thing I wanted to do for this book, I worked on this stuff a lot, and I learned so much by really digging into the research. So I guess that's the one thing: keep learning.
And after 70 years, I would say get married and buy a house.
Congratulations, Deb.
Thank you, Joe.
So it's 7:04. I'm now 3 minutes over my allotted time. What I'd like to invite everyone to do is now please to line up because Deb will sign your book. And if you have a question that you didn't get to ask or didn't want to ask in front of a lot of other people, maybe make this your opportunity. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Deb, for this illuminating, awesome book. Congratulations.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, everyone. So the books are